So let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
I think Trump understands how to deal with China. Trump was the first president, he did this in the first term, to ever stand up to China and say, stop the stealing. And now he's doubled down, and it's working.
And it's got to be part of the ultimate agreement, 90 days to work out the details. And believe me, China really needs a way out here. The economy's rolling in a way. The market's soaring, trade deals await Trump when he comes back. China talks back on track, and the big, beautiful bill trudges forward. We'll keep you up to date.
Number 2.
There's no chance that the Iranians are going to do a fully verifiable denuclearization with inspections and no enrichment. The Israelis and the United States should go do everything at this moment we can to ensure that they never get a nuclear weapon.
There you go. Mike Pompeo talking as former Secretary of State, former CIA director. Iran, you've been warned. No nukes one way or another. The Gulf states agree, while Israel wonders why they've been left out of the dialogue. Also, the Hail Mary move Iran is trying. I'll explain.
Number 1.
After discussing the situation in Syria with the Crown Prince, your Crown Prince, I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness.
Second leg of Trump's tour, three-nation tour. Well, we're in it now. Deals are cut, relationships fortified, and Syria gets their sanction relief. Trump is remaking the Middle East in real terms, I think for the better, and the world is taking notice. I saw with David Ignatius, hopefully we'll get him back this week. He wrote, the president does the weave, famous for the weave. And everyone thought, well, that's because he likes to change topics in the middle. He calls it the weave. But this is the quote. He said, the president said, I do the weave, where I weave this and I weave that. I'll talk about 9 different things all at once. And then Dave Ignatius writes, that sounded like utter nonsense at the time. I wouldn't bet the ranch or Israeli security on the outcome, but American foreign policy has been stuck within a set of fixed parameters for several decades, and it's worth giving this a fresh look. Hours ago, the president met with the new leader and the temporary leader, they say, of Syria. Who is he? He's one of the founders of al-Nusra. What are they? A form of al-Qaeda Muslim Brotherhood. What was he doing? Killing people. Has he changed? Our next guest says yes, Mouaz Moustafa. We'll talk to him. So I'll lay off the Syria details. I'll get into that with him. Bottom of the hour, Rich Larry will be with us and talk about the politics of it all and try to make sense of it. As far as the trip goes, even Maggie Haberman had trouble not seeing how happy President Trump has been. Cut 3.
There is no real foreign policy agenda or aim that has been laid out for this trip that I'm aware of. Now, yes, the president announced that he is going to halt these sanctions on Syria, and that is significant. If that moves ahead, that is a big deal for the region. But in terms of what he is hoping to accomplish with this mission, in terms of the U.S. and its relationships with the region, they haven't really articulated a longer arc.
Since she doesn't understand it, I will explain it. He wants to fortify relations with the Gulf neighbors, and he wants to get investment in our country and partnerships. And to do that, you got to go meet with them. And what he's done, and I'm sure, I don't know if she's pretending not to understand this, but when you have Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the CEO of Google and the CEO of Citibank, I mean, literally everybody is with them. You have the most powerful American business people in the world, and they're having investment meetings and conferences in real time. She could go to any of these events. This is about more than business, ceremony and business and transactions and mutual signs of agreement and understanding. And what's interesting is, and I never thought, I had to really reflect on this before the show started on Fox and Friends today. It's the first time we're ever talking about the Arab states and not talking about oil flows and barrels and how much it costs and the drilling. And really, we're not talking about OPEC at all. And then to see Brett Baer do his interview last night with the economics minister saying over 50% of his economy has nothing to do with oil and gas. They're trying to transition. That's what this is about. It's as much about tech center and business as relations. And with the Syria situation, it was something that happens face to face. The Crown Prince and the President of Turkey looked at him and said, would you do me a favor? Would you relieve some of the sanctions? And in turn, they will protect the Christians. They will also not attack Israel, make sure Iran doesn't get access, and China is kept out. I would love to see Russia kept out too. Cut 4.
Trump looks about as happy as you can imagine. He is being treated like a king. And we have seen many instances where he has wanted to be treated sort of commensurate with leaders in foreign countries, in autocratic countries, or with autocratic leadership. And he looks as if he is ruling over everything right now.
Bothers her, doesn't it? So go ahead. Go out of your way to be negative. That's fine. Focus on the $400 million plane that we're going to get or not going to get. You could do that. But I would just appreciate if you have enough, you have 92% of all your coverage is going to be negative. But when you go overseas, and I watched CNN International, actually, and I watched the BBC, I watched Al Jazeera, and you can catch this stuff online, by the way. And I watched Israeli television. It's positive reviews. In terms of the relationship and what is the takeaway from all this, the Minister of Economy and Planning in Saudi Arabia sat down with Brett yesterday, and he talked about what this all means. Cut 8.
Today we saw from both speeches, from His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and from President Donald Trump, that there's a lot of common values or a lot of common approaches to addressing global challenges. We heard both leaders talk about peace and prosperity. We heard both leaders talk about dialogue, and we've seen what dialogue has led to in terms of the US and UK deal, US and China deal, and what the Saudi has led also through dialogue in the region to bring more stability.
So we'll talk about that. Before we go, just a quick thing on the economy. Yesterday's number showed the slowest growth of inflation in a few years, and it was below anyone projected. So the economy loved that. And then you factor in last week's job numbers, which were better than anyone thought by a lot, and the economy loved that, and the markets loved that. And then you add the deal, the framework to work out a deal with China, and the market soared, and they exceeded Liberation Day. Charles Gasparino's been covering it all. And I'll talk about China in detail, how it relates to you. But he said this about Liberation Day and what's happened since. Cut 30.
I'll tell you, that day after Liberation Day, I was at a restaurant sitting there with a drink in my hand, and I'm looking at my phone, and every major bond investor was telling me, this is insane. Yields were starting to spike through the roof. The 10-year yield, remember, that's the most important one.
Which Besson talks about all the time.
The reason why every consumer rate is pegged off that. If that starts gapping out to 4.5, we're at 4.4 now. You got to check the chart. But the 5, where it was heading that night, we're in deep trouble.
But since then, it's come all the way back, and it got people to reevaluate their trade relationships. Indications yesterday from Kevin Hassett that when the president comes back, there's going to be some deals to sign. A lot going on. So glad you're here. I wanted you to weigh in. I see you already lining up 1-866-408-7669. I'll do a whole block just on your emails. But coming up next, a special treat. Mouaz Moustafa, who's been in Syria during the middle of the worst times of the civil unrest, the barrel bombing, the Assad trying to hold on to power, the influx of Iran and Russia, and now says that Donald Trump has done more for Middle East peace than anybody in his lifetime. He texted me this last night. He's going to be joining us, I think, from Syria. He's the executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, then Rich Lowry, on the politics of it all. You listen to the Brian Kilmeade Show.
The sanctions were brutal and crippling and served as an important function, nevertheless, at the time. But now it's their time to shine. It's their time to shine. We're taking them all off, and they're going to have, I think they're going to have, based on the people and the spirit and everything else that I'm hearing about.
So the president decided to take the sanctions off Syria and leave his and ask Marco Rubio to meet with the foreign minister or the temporary foreign minister of this new country, Syria, with some people with dicey backgrounds. I get it. I'm not saying that these are Hall of Fame human beings, but Turkey and the government of Saudi Arabia asked the president to do this, and he did. Mouaz Moustafa is fully in support of this. He would know. He's been on the ground almost since the civil war started there and saw all the ugliness with the Russians and Iranians, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Kurds have been fighting about up close and personal. He's the executive director for the Syrian Emergency Task Force after he met with the new leader of Syria for 3 hours. Mouaz, thanks for joining us on television. And now please give us your perspective on the president's announcement and what it means.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I am just so proud and so grateful to President Trump. I mean, I do think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I do think that a lot of people don't really understand the implications of what the president's decision means and also the way that he did it. I mean, the fact that he made this meeting with the new Syrian leader in Saudi Arabia, balancing off, other countries with leverage in Syria like Turkey and Qatar, and empowering the Crown Prince, who's been a really good partner for peace with President Trump. Number two, making sure that he's lifting all of the sanctions. Now, that's important because that prevents Syria, which was weeks away from becoming a failed state, which means perpetual war, which means the Iranians back in, ISIS back on the rise, etc. And also by lifting sanctions and bringing Syria towards democracies and becoming a potentially important and influential ally of the United States, he closed the door on China. So instead of Huawei right now in Syria rebuilding the telecommunication system, which is bad news for everyone, having China do this, AT&T could be one of these companies that is doing this. And in terms of gas and oil as well, instead of Russia and China and Iran being the ones that take the oil, develop it in their corrupt systems and steal it from the Syrian people, now you have American companies that can bid on this with the best technologies in the world, the most efficient way to exploit natural resources to help the Syrian people. And so, it was really a master chess move, the lifting of sanctions and normalization.
So, Mouaz, this is what people are saying. Even last week, there was a surge in violence against the Syrian Druze religious community. Over 100 people were killed since the start of May. What about making sure the Christians have a place and the Druze have a place? Even the Shia, Assad was Shia, right? He was a Shia sect. So even that they have a place.
Alawite. That's right. That's right. Well, look, I think this is a really important point that you raise. And here, I think what's important is I was in Syria during that violence that happened, where there was violence against the Druze community from some armed groups. But it was and that's true. But it was the Syrian government that actually lost lives stopping that violence. And I've been in touch regularly since December 8th, the fall of Assad, Iran, and Russia in Syria, with the bishop of Syria, the highest ranking Catholic representative there, with the Eastern Orthodox churches, with the evangelical churches, and with people in the Kurdish community, Alawite community. What they all see is that the new Syrian leadership is one that is trying to stave off revenge killings, to stave off any civil war in Syria. And so that's important to highlight. And look, a country like Syria, which has been 14 years of war, 1 million people dead, 14 million displaced. It's a country that's trying to come together after Iran and ISIS and Assad divided these people against each other. And today they have hope. They have hope in their new leadership.
Mouaz, are you Syrian?
Yeah, yes, sir. I was born in Damascus, but I moved to the United States, to Arkansas, when I was about 9 years old. So I grew up in the U.S., proud to be an American, but really happy to see the United States help Syria potentially become probably the first democracy in the Arab world.
But you met with this former head of al-Nusra for 3 hours. You met him before. Yes. I mean, why? Do you understand the American people look at these extremists and wonder? We hear they never can turn the page. Why don't we believe that he turned the page?
That's a great question. And again, I think actions speak louder than words. I can very proudly tell you that, my organization, the Syrian Emergency Task Force, have helped facilitate, direct contact between the U.S. military and the new Syrian government. And today, this new Syrian leader, who, yes, absolutely has a checkered past, absolutely has evolved, in different times in his life, and joined terrible groups, but he is a changed man. The fact is, people change. And today, this new leader works directly with the U.S. military, both Operation Inherent Resolve, Lieutenant General Leahy, our special forces led by Lieutenant General Brooks, on fighting ISIS, on securing ISIS prisoners, on making deals that bring together the SDF Kurdish forces and the Syria Free Army American partner forces under a new Ministry of Defense. So this guy is actually right now, ISIS's worst nightmare. He fights them. And if ISIS was to come across them, they'd kill him. These are facts. Yet, unfortunately, because of his checkered past, people assume that he, is somehow, an ISIS person. He's not. He's actually ISIS's worst enemy in Syria and vice versa.
Mouaz is, Moustafa is joining us now, Executive Director for the Syrian Emergency Task Force. Mouaz, now we want to see a couple of things. We'd like to see the Russian presence gone. They are lobbying hard to keep their port and to keep their base. Why are they even considering it, considering how many Syrians the Russians have indiscriminately killed over the last 5 years?
Well, for the last 3 months or so, since December 8th, when the Assad regime fell, the new Syrian government and the new Syrian leader have been holding out against deals with Russia or China, etc., until President Trump was able to have, the time to look at Syria and address it and make a decision, which has now happened. And effectively, what President Trump has done is allowed the Syrians not to have no choice but to work with Russia and China, because Syria can't develop its oil and gas alone. Syria can't print its own currency alone. Syria doesn't have, electricity and so on. And the Russians were saying, look, we'll do this. We'll lift sanctions. Just keep our bases. Today, the Syrians now have so much leverage to tell the Russians, which have killed countless innocent civilians in Syria, to get their bases and go packing. What President Trump has done is close the door on Russia and allowed the Syrian government not to be forced to deal with the people that killed them in the first place. And because it was either that or a financial collapse,
I understand. Hopefully this is options, Mouaz. My hope is that the president brought that up. Protect all these religious sects and also kick out the Russians. Mouaz Moustafa, you do great work, great communicator too. Hopefully the administration keeps reaching back to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
God bless you, sir.
There's no chance that the Iranians are going to do a fully verifiable denuclearization with inspections and no enrichment and destroying their missiles and missile program and then stopping terror. I mean, the probability of them agreeing to that, Brian, you know this, it's a zero. I think the time is on us. They're frankly at amongst their weakest points in an awfully long time, in spite of the Biden administration, not because of it. The Israelis and the United States should go do everything at this moment we can to ensure that they never get a nuclear weapon. And I'm confident we have the tools and skills and capabilities to pull that off.
And that is Mike Pompeo, and I 100% agree. He's now talking freely, does not have to be a diplomat as Secretary of State. With us right now is Ellie Cohanim, who served as U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to combat anti-terrorism, anti-Semitism in the State Department, visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Ellie, I agree with the Secretary of State. You're not going to be able to trust Iran to get rid of their own nuclear program, although they've never been as vulnerable in my lifetime as they are right now.
Yeah, Brian, first of all, it's great to be back with you. Secretary Pompeo, as you know, was incredibly strong on the issue of Iran. And I don't think that President Trump in his second term has any love lost for the Iranian regime. I don't think that he knows very well the nature of the regime, that this is a radical Islamist regime that grabbed power in '79, took 52 American embassy staff as hostages. I call that the original sin of the regime. However, the president does seem to want to genuinely give them, the Iranian regime, an opportunity to save themselves, right? To agree to a negotiated dismantling of their nuclear program. So therefore, they don't have to face the what.
So he's giving them a chance. Give him an out.
A real chance.
So Saturday, he went and visited the foreign minister, Iranian foreign minister, went and visited Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, and said they had a proposal. They said, because UAE has a nuclear program since 2016 and they enrich outside their country, you want a nuclear program and you want to enrich outside your country because you need special permission to enrich. I imagine Germany's seeking that now, reportedly. So he said, why don't we just get to a consortium together and enrich together? Would you agree to that? Evidently, the Saudis are hedging. I don't know idea about UAE if they could be intimidated. Do you think that's something we'd ever accept?
Well, I don't see the Saudis and the Emiratis accepting getting into a consortium with Iran. So I just don't see that idea moving
But that's
forward.
how desperate they are, don't you think?
Yeah, and Brian, I don't trust them with any of their suggestions. So I would wonder if this is some other way to try to, I don't know, maybe
delay the game.
Delay the game, stretch out negotiations, try to bring our trusted partners into their circle. But again, what Secretary Rubio has said on this topic is if Iran truly wants a civil nuclear program, then they can import like every other country that has a civilian program. We're never going to allow them to enrich inside the country.
Do you really think Iran's worried about oil and gas? Are they worried about the environment? We want to burn clean energy. They don't want a civilian nuclear program. Nobody thinks they do. So having said that, they have an S-300 defense system that Israel blew up. They have leaders that they know have targets on their backs. Mysterious explosions are happening in Iran. Last week, so they usually link back to Israel. They'll never admit it. But in Israel, I get the feeling that they feel like they've been left out of this trip. This is a Gulf state visit. The president doesn't bring up Israel much, doesn't bring up the Palestinians much. What is it like to you, according to your sources, in Israel right now?
Well, Brian, here's the thing. On the flip side of that, Prime Minister Netanyahu is the only foreign leader who was invited by President Trump to the White House 2 times in the first 100 days. And his senior advisor, Ron Dermer, was just in the White House last week. And so I do know that there's a lot of close coordination between our two countries. I don't think there is any daylight. I think that President Trump is the strongest ally Israel has ever had in the White House and will continue to have in the White House. And here's what I think the headline news of this entire trip so far has been. President Trump looking directly across at Crown Prince MBS and saying, "It is my dream that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords." I mean, literally everyone should have stopped at that moment and said, wow, the President of the United States just said it's my dream. And he said, and if you do that, you will be honoring me. So Israel did not need to be mentioned outright. But that was the headline of that speech, was Israel was front and center, right?
What are the Abraham Accords? Recognizing Israel.
Recognize Israel.
So Syria, there was a meeting with the interim president of Syria, who was a terrorist, now running the country, trying to get a hold of his country. And on the urging of Turkey and Saudi Arabia, we have decided to, I guess, pull sanctions back on them, and maybe in a pathway towards recognition. But we have some demands. And do you want to run through some of those demands?
Yeah, Brian. So you and I were just looking at this list of demands that I've seen, I believe, sourced to the White House. Join the Abraham Accords and normalize ties with Israel. Here we go again. Israel front and center. Expel all foreign terror groups from Syrian territory. Remove Palestinian terrorists. Assist the U.S. in blocking any ISIS resurgence. Take control of ISIS detention centers. This is really major because we obviously don't want those detention centers to be overrun or for those terrorists to get released.
I would like to say remove Russian bases.
Yes.
I would love that. I know you don't have to tell them to get rid of Iran because they're in a death match with Iran.
Exactly.
And the bitterness from the barrel bombing and everything else exists. But why the Russians still have a base there, my hope is speaking to one of our Syrian sources, is that they had no choice. They needed some money. But now that they might have another option, they could tell the Russians, we know the role that you've played in killing millions of people along with Assad, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And propping up that horrible regime.
Yes, which has killed, hundreds of thousands of Syrians. And I'll say this, it does seem also that Putin right now is so caught up in the quagmire of his war with Ukraine that also perhaps it didn't seem like the Russian base was the most urgent, item to list on this priority list of immediate demands.
But my problem is the way they bring the weapons into the region that go to the Houthis and using that Middle East port. They came back in the region through Syria. And because we totally dropped the ball after the surge, and next thing you know, Iran is fighting ISIS in Iraq.
Yes.
How the hell that happened during the Obama years cannot be forgotten. Here is what the Minister of Economy and Planning of Saudi Arabia said to Brett last night about this trip. Cut 8.
Today we saw from both speeches, from His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and from President Donald Trump, that there's a lot of common values or a lot of common approaches to addressing global challenges. We heard both leaders talk about peace and prosperity. We heard both leaders talk about dialogue. And we've seen what dialogue has led to in terms of the US and UK deal, US and China deal, and what the Saudi has led also through dialogue in the region to bring more stability.
It's clear relationships matter. It's very interesting what's happening because the relationship with the previous administration, they say Saudi Arabia was the pariah nation and the Houthi rebels should be taken off the terror watch list. How disconcerting. In retrospect, is that two of the stupidest moves ever?
Yeah, I mean, the list of stupid moves from the Biden administration,
incredible.
So long. But Brian, you're so right. The contrast between the president's reception, President Trump's reception right now, the purple carpet, the horses with his car.
Today was camels.
Yeah, today was camels. But really and truly a royal and regal reception of the president.
And you know Trump loves that stuff.
Well, but he deserves it. And, so to the plane, return to the plane. Obviously, the warmth between him and the Crown Prince MBS. I think the praise was really in both directions. And so these two men, President Trump and Crown Prince MBS, I think have the potential with Netanyahu to reshape this region for the next 100 years.
And here, just because, and you're a student of the area, you live it, but every time we start getting on track, there's some type of devastating terror attack or assassination that takes place that gets everyone off track. And the best example of that is 9/11. The second best example is October 7th. So that whole region goes into flames. Saddam Hussein's aggression needs to be addressed. The whole area goes into flames. We have a situation now where if we can resolve the Iranian problem, it's isolated. It's no longer Iran in Syria, right, or Iran in Iraq, or whatever. Now you have a situation where if you could settle Iran, that's a way to settle Iraq, because Iran is creating havoc in Iraq.
Yes.
They're now out of Syria. Hamas is flat on its back. They just lost their latest leader, Mohammed Sinwar. I hope. My fingers are crossed.
Me too.
And then Hezbollah flat on its back. Close, if they could finish the job. So this might be a chance just to see nations have rivalries instead of wars.
Yeah, and look, President Trump said in his speech that he kind of gave them, the Iranians, another ultimatum. He gave them, he told them, the time is running out. They don't have forever. They need to make a decision. And the decision before them is what we were talking about earlier, Brian. Is the regime going to dismantle and save yourselves? Because if you don't dismantle, then I do think, look, the president has put the military option on the table. The Israelis certainly have put the military option on the table. No one knows what happens next, So the regime should really be taking a cold, hard look in the mirror and saying, yeah, we are radical revolutionaries. We hate America. We hate the Jews. But this is our last chance to essentially save our grip on power.
Right.
And so you've got the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. He's 85 years old. It's hard to tell if he gets the significance of the moment that he's in.
And Iran, I think that Israel, with their intelligence, they know exactly where he is 24 hours a day.
Yes.
It's just whether it's going to be counterproductive to take him out.
Yes, him and then, the IRGC. So I'm with you, Brian, though. We are in a very interesting moment in history where I think things can really turn right now, depending on decisions made.
Ellie, thanks so much. Appreciate it. It's an exciting time.
The sanctions were brutal and crippling and served as an important function, nevertheless, at the time. But now it's their time to shine. It's their time to shine. We're taking them all off, and they're going to have, I think they're going to have, based on the people and the spirit and everything else that I'm hearing about.
Well, we'll see. There's a lot of sex, and 100 people were killed last week in Syria. It is a brutal place. But the government that has emerged is anti-Russian, anti-Iran, and wants to have relations with us. And we have not had a face-to-face meeting with a Syrian leader in 25 years. Martha MacCallum's in studio, if you're smart enough to watch the stream she's on. Martha, your reaction to that announcement, that was not on the schedule.
No. It wasn't. It probably came at some of the influence in the discussions with the Saudis. I think there had to be a choice made about this new leader in Syria. I mean, just keep in mind that this is a guy who in December, if you had information on his whereabouts, you could have made $10 million from the U.S. government.
Wow. There was
$10 million on his head in December, and now we're in May. But you have to make decisions in these moments, right? And you see the influence of Russia and China, particularly Russia, but also China and Iran in the region. And what I see at work here is that President Trump is empowering some of these other players who he believes that he can deal with, help to become more prosperous, and doing in many ways exactly what China has done in regions around the world, where you build economic prosperity, you invest in the country in order to make them somewhat beholden to you. And so you see the minimization on this map of Russia, of Iran, and of China. And I think if you're Bashar Assad and you're sitting in your exile home in Russia right now, and you're Putin looking at this meeting tomorrow, you're feeling a little unsettled by what you're watching unfold over the last few days. And the level, the profile of it with President Trump in the region has to be unsettling to Putin, I think, and probably to Xi as well. And that is completely intentional, I would imagine, on the White House part.
The way in this era of MBS, and I know about Khashoggi, I haven't forgotten that, and the 9/11 families feel as though Saudis were never transparent about their role of maybe some of the royal family's role in 9/11, and I understand that too. No one ever put MBS in that category, but Khashoggi, you could say that he could have signed off on that, or who knows. But that's 5-6 years ago. Do you call them a pariah nation like Joe Biden? How'd that work out? You take the Houthis off the terror watch list. How did that work out? But you see the way the president was treated, and understand this is not about Trump. It's about our country. Our country is being treated that way. He represents the United States. And then we come in with the most important American businessmen, and they're doing deals in conferences right after. And then you say, okay, we're not telling you how to run your country. We know that female rights are more 1910 than 2025. I understand, but they are making gains. I tell you what, we're not really judging you right now. We're judging about where you're moving economically, how we could work together fiscally, and then we could also deepen that relationship for influence with policies. And one of the things is, hey, it really bothers me when you signed off on that China deal with you and Iran, signed off on this mutual non-aggression pact or whatever you signed. Where'd that come from? Well, you don't even have to bring it up. The next stop is Qatar. It's a complicated country. I got it. But now we're in there. They're buying Boeing planes. We got that beautiful military site there. And then we're going to the UAE, at which time there's going to be an opportunity for half the delegation to go to Turkey to meet with Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky. This is pretty intense.
It's an absolutely unbelievable week. And you look at the energy in this executive, it is truly extraordinary. I mean, if you compare it to the same period, a year ago with President Biden, who had almost nothing on his schedule and didn't engage. It's an engagement question as a president. Biden's policy was to not engage with any of these players. Yeah. I mean, he called MBS a pariah, and then he went and they had that awkward fist bump. But you could tell this wasn't going anywhere. This wasn't building any relationship. So Trump, and it is a policy of complete engagement, even with people whose actions you may disapprove of. And clearly, these people are on that list in many cases. When you look at Qatar, when you look at some of what you talked about with Khashoggi and Saudi Arabia, but you have to ask yourself, how are the American people better off? Are they better off if we engage? And engagement, that's what we're trying to see here tomorrow. He's encouraging them. Zelensky and Putin sit down and talk to each other. Think of that face-to-face meeting at the Vatican. And that was after a really rough Oval Office moment between those two people. But he doesn't say, I hate that guy. Cross him off my list. He goes, nope, we're going back in. We're going to talk at the Vatican. And then I want him to sit down with Putin face-to-face. We'll see how it goes. But, I mean, it's a clear policy, a clear mentality and approach.
What's interesting is with Zelensky, it's emblematic of the way Trump works. He gets really mad at you. You go at it, whether you're a journalist or whether you're a political opponent. But he says, okay, it's not personal.
Right.
And what it is that conversation would have been reported on by an insider who had a friend that was in the room where Zelensky and Trump got at each other, and there'll be counter arguments. Nothing happened. But instead, Trump's policy is, if I have something to say, I'll say it in front of the cameras, which I think in retrospect we'll go into really appreciate, even though it was unpleasant. But what happens is, when you go to war with somebody or go out with somebody, you have a closeness. It's a mutual respect. Sometimes it ends up being a warmth, but it's a respect. So after you've been through all that, one of the messages I heard from that meeting was, don't overreact to what I say about Putin. And when you need something, call me directly. I like you. We get along. Call me directly. Don't let the media tell you what to do. And since that time, remember, the European leaders said last week, no ceasefire, we're going to have a ceasefire before we talk about any type of peace agreement. Well, the next day, Vladimir Putin thought he was going to call these guys out by saying, let's meet Thursday, one-on-one direct talks. Right. I actually think he was outmaneuvered. He probably never thought Trump was going to, who called into that meeting on the phone, was never going to say yes. Without a ceasefire, he goes, yeah, we'll do it. Do it Thursday. Called Zelensky. We posted it. Do it Thursday. So he's showing up. So Vladimir Putin goes, wait, he might not show up for a meeting that he called? So this was a great move for Trump. Take every opportunity to get towards your goal.
Absolutely. And last time they had a ceasefire, it fell apart instantly. They're still firing at each other. The Russians still sending missiles into Ukraine and retaliation from Ukraine. So I think Trump looks at that and goes, okay, well, that didn't work. So, do what you're going to do on both sides, but sit down at the table and let's have a discussion. It's going to be, do you think that Putin's going to show up?
I think it's 50-50. I've been reading everything possible. But let's say, who could he show up that would be worthy of a conversation? Lavrov? Well, that's not what you said. I want direct talks. You could say it. And then if Lavrov shows up to Zelensky, does that make Putin look bad? No?
I don't see how how Zelensky takes a meeting with Lavrov. It doesn't, it's not an equal footing meeting.
So then you wonder, Rubio's going to be there and Kellogg's going to be there. And Rubio's got his meeting with the Syrian foreign minister in Ankara too. Mm-hmm. Crazy. Istanbul, I think it is, I guess. Well, one of those cities. So he's going to meet with the Syrian leaders to see about moving things forward. But I don't know how, if Vladimir Putin doesn't show up, he looks terrible because there's nothing that he requested that they're not getting. It's not like you infiltrated Moscow with a drone strike. No, there's been nothing going on.
Well, I think that, when you look at the question, you see this kind of different posture. President Trump, every time that Putin did not live up to what he said he was willing to do and kept striking, you saw Trump kind of moving a little bit further and further away from him. And that's when he sat down with Zelensky at the Vatican, opening the door to potentially U.S. military support. We know the mineral deal is what they see as the national security guarantee. But I think that sit down made Putin look at it and say, wait, maybe I'm losing Trump here.
Absolutely.
And Zelensky had then hope that perhaps he could maintain and more support from the United States, even though, when I interviewed J.D. Vance last week, he said, no way. There's no way we're going to add any more military support for Ukraine. President Trump seemed to be a little bit open to the possibility if he didn't like the reaction. He kept saying, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing from Putin. So tomorrow is obviously very significant.
We'll write a check. Number one, they'll write a check. They go, we will buy Patriots. Mm-hmm. Number two is not all the Biden era money has been given out yet. So that you can honestly say, well, this is stuff that's already been earmarked, and then you don't know what the Europeans are prepared to do and how many F-16s we will decide to release for them. Also, they now have a way to pay for it. You could take it out on the potential worth of the rare earth mining. So they say you could actually trade on that. The other thing you could do is the interest made on the frozen funds from Moscow. We've been reluctant to do that. So we got to let them know. The other thing that was mentioned that I heard in Crosstalk 2 weeks ago when I was in the White House is that they're looking at the central bank, and they say that sanction the central bank will cause pain.
Yeah. I think Trump has always felt that was what's in his back pocket, cutting off the banking access for Russia, and that idea of potentially using the frozen assets in Europe to pay for military help for Ukraine. It's a pretty beautiful concept that doesn't cost the American people any money. Meanwhile, you've got the mineral deal, which is not retroactive. It's, as of now, going forward, any money that comes out of that. So I think that, that makes Trump feel better about maybe increasing a little bit of support if Putin doesn't come to the table in a meaningful way. But I think Putin looks at it and he's like, he's now seeing a little bit of edge coming back at him from we'll see where Rubio is on it, but from the president, clearly.
But you know what it also shows? All those years of saying Putin's got something on Trump. Putin's got something on Trump. No, he said, I watched the way you guys treat him. It's gotten you nowhere. I really don't mind him. Kind of like hanging out with him. But I'm not going to, I'm going to sanction Nord Stream 2. I'm going to make sure that you buy our natural gas. So there were things that he was doing against Vladimir Putin that was tough.
Ended Nord Stream 2.
Yeah, but he wouldn't do it with like
sent actual weapons to Ukraine. I mean, we know the playbook. I'm always amazed that people are shocked when they see President Trump sort of, be cordial with someone who is clearly an adversary and open up the conversation. It's like you're never going to get anywhere with these people if you don't bring them in. And Putin plays this game too. I mean, Putin's played it with every U.S. president. So they're both very crafty at, making it appear that they can find some common ground, but still keeping their guard up.
Yeah, we're going to take a time out. But here's my last thing about Putin that makes him reluctant. He's taken his whole economy. They say 45% of his economy is all military spending. All these people are working in military warehouses and factories. So if all of a sudden this war comes to an end, that you don't need weapons at this pace, what are these people doing for a living? So that's one thing that you could...
And hundreds of thousands of young people dead.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people, evidently there's a big story I was reading last week about these people are coming back to war deranged. You know how the price the war can take on a toll on people? Well, they're going into a war they don't understand in the most
they get no medical
fashion.
Assistance in the field. They're left to die. They have no sense that, Mother Russia is sweeping in to save them. No man left behind. That is not the way it is working
angry
on the Russian side.
Walking the streets.
Absolutely.
So if he wants to end the war, he's like, I don't really know how this works for me.
Yeah, how are they all going to?
Yeah, a lot going on. Back in a moment.
Kilmeade, based on your low book sales, you should be homeless. What do you think of the current state of California homelessness?
First, I'd like to address the crowd. You laughed at his monologue and you turned on me before I had a chance to say a word. I'll never forgive you. Number two, my book sales might be the best in the company, but I know you're so jealous to bring that up.
So that was Greg Gutfeld making every appearance on his show so enjoyable. That was my 30. They did some math. I did my 37th appearance there. Martha MacCallum with me today. Martha, who's on your show at 3?
So we're going to talk to Russ Vought, the Secretary of the Office of Management and Budget. He's the guy who's basically taking over DOGE.
Yeah.
And this is really, really important because this work cannot stop. I don't care what party you're in. There is a tremendous amount of waste in the government. So we're going to talk to him about how he's going to carry on that mantle, whether or not he's going to keep his pedal to the metal, and also this budget deal that they're working on and what he thinks is the actual structure of it. You're going to hear a lot of emotional back and forth on Medicaid. And how that should be, run and the cuts that might be made to it. So we're going to dig into that with him. And General Jack Keane is going to weigh in. First time we're hearing from him about what he's watched unfolding in the Middle East. So we're looking forward to hearing his thoughts on that.
Right. Medicaid was supposed to be for the poor. It was supposed to be for the indigent. And now it was supposed to be funded by the states. Now 1 in 5 Americans have Medicaid. I've understand it. And now 90% of it in all except 10 states are funded by the federal government. It's ballooned to the point where it's almost unaffordable, but you don't want to take it away from people if politically, because you don't want to take, you don't want to leave people without insurance. Understood. But Obamacare expanded it to the point where it's not sustainable. And if Republicans go in to do it, they don't like poor people, right?
Well, you have to be deserving of it. And that's a huge question. So I think that we all want the deserving poor to have the opportunity to have a benefit that gets them through the hard time until they can get back on their feet again. That's what it was completely designed for. And it's not designed to take care of, a huge part of the country and be like, in some cases, well, I'm not going to work because when I put all these benefits together, I'm okay.
And they just say, people like Senator Ron Johnson say, I'm not going to vote for this because it's going to balloon the deficit. Rand Paul is always useless. And we have Susan Collins worried about a re-election. I'm not saying I don't know what she's going to do, but she's definitely going to need some work, as is Murkowski. And then on the House side, you have Chip Roy against the SALT caucus, which is the states we're in.
Yeah, I think the SALT thing is going to become negotiable as this moves forward. It's going to be an area where they know if they offer, X, then they can pull it back to Y. They can get away with that. If they don't do the upper tax bracket increase, which it sounds like they're not going to do now, They might be able to give up salt in the end, so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Lawler and the others in New York and New Jersey are the ones going to bat for that. It allows you to write off your state taxes, which are through the roof. And when you push back and say, why is New York being rewarded for that? Their pushback is we pay more to the federal government in taxes, so therefore we deserve some type of break statewide.
But you have a lot of people at the upper end of the income in those states as well, because that's where a lot of them live. So in that case, if you're not getting an increase on the upper end of the income bracket, SALT may end up going, or it might be smaller in terms of what you can deduct.
So Dave Ignatius had something, and I know you could appreciate this. You know, obviously the Washington Post, very rarely do they say anything positive, but he's a very well sourced guy, very good writer. And he said something I think you could appreciate. He's watching the president's foreign policy. He says, are you having trouble following the plot? Recall that Trump's comment in September during his campaign, I do the weave. You know what the weave is? I'll talk about it. Like 9 different things, they all come back brilliantly together. That's what Trump said. He said, that sounded like utter nonsense to me at the time. I wouldn't bet the ranch or Israel's security on that outcome. But American foreign policy has been stuck within a set of fixed parameters for several decades. It's worth giving them a fresh look.
Yeah,
that's the establishment saying, I'm tired of just being negative.
I mean, don't these people, I'm always amazed. It's like people approach the way that they look at Trump as if they have never followed what he's done before. So if you're David Ignatius, who I agree with you, very smart writer, very well sourced, but did you not notice the Abraham Accords? Did you not see that there, and even back then, all of those people across the board were like, this is incredible. No one thought this could be done. And at that point, we were right on the verge of maybe having Saudi Arabia join in as well. And then October 7th happened. So you have to have hindsight. Look at the history. Look at how he works.
The Story, 3 p.m., Fox News Channel.